Phil accused me of cheating and disowned our baby for having brown eyes. Now he's turning our older son against us and not letting them meet. So I cut him off from my children's life. I, 37F, have been going through a weird problem in life. I recently had a baby and my Phil refuses to accept him as his grandchild because of his brown eyes. I have been married to my husband for over a decade. I have a 4-year-old son, Dean, who is the exact copy of his father and grandfather. However, my younger son, who is now 4 weeks old, doesn't look like them. He looks like me but has brown eyes like my dad. My husband, Phil, Mill, Dean, and I, all have blue eyes. Phil has told us that he would not accept my younger son to be his grandchild until we run a paternity test on him. You see, how crazy he is. My Phil has never been so fond of me. Ever since he met me 15 years ago, he has been resentful of me. We were still in grad school when my husband introduced me to his parents. Initially, he was very cheerful and fascinated by my achievements at the school, but when he got to know about my parents, he made an awful face. He was upset that I come from a lower middle-class family. He thought I was not a suitable girl to date for his son. He told my husband that dating and all is fine, but he shouldn't get serious about me. He even suggested my husband seek his friend's daughter as they were classy and wealthier. My husband didn't tell me all this until much later. God knows what he sees in me that he stuck around. Unlike what my Phil thinks, we are not poor. My dad is a plumber and not so flashy businessman like my Phil. Phil raised his eyebrow when I told him my mom worked part-time jobs. Money was decent, but we were 4 kids, so we were always on a tight budget. It was because of the scholarship that I was able to make it to that college. He was shocked when my husband told him we were getting married because he couldn't believe that our relationship sustained after grad school. Though he was upset with his son's choice to marry me, he showed up at our wedding and was in his best behavior, even with my parents and family. 6 years later, when my elder son was born, Phil was over the moon. He was apprehensive about my ability to conceive a grandchild for him because we didn't plan kids for 6 years of our marriage. He thought I had a problem. Whatever it be, he was happy he got one, and most importantly he looked like him and his son, my husband. Kids do cast some good spells on their grandparents. To add the cherry on the cake, he was a boy, and my Phil is the kind of person who thinks boys bear the family name. My husband and I thought it was a good way to bond with Phil. We could have cut off Phil from our lives, but it was because of Mill we were putting up with him. She is a pure soul. She has always been sweet and loving to me. Dean visited his grandparents every weekend. Sometimes my husband used to take him and sometimes I did. After he turned 1, he started staying over at his grandparents for the weekend. We took that as an opportunity to rekindle our relationship. To be honest, pregnancy and nursing a child does push the romance into the back seat. We were working parents, so we didn't time during the week. We kinda enjoyed the weekend by ourselves when Dean spent time with his grandparents. Things got better between me and Phil as we met quite often. We used to have weekly dinner at their place. When Phil got to know about my second pregnancy, he started telling my son that mini Dean would be coming soon. I knew it was a boy, but my husband wanted it to be a surprise, so I didn't tell anyone. I hated when Phil said only boys are born in his family because my second son was gonna boost his ego, but there was nothing I could do. When my younger son, Sean, was born, Phil entered my room with Dean in his arms saying, "Let's see our junior Dean. I'm sure he would look just like his dad, grandpa, and brother." When I handed over the baby to him and he saw him, he freaked out. He said, "Why does he have a brown eye? Are you sure it's your son? I bet they have given you the wrong baby." "Let me call the nurse," I said. "Relax, he is my son and he has been with me ever since they pulled him out, so there's no chance of exchange." He said, "Then how come his eyes are not blue?" I said, "Brown eyes are the most common eye color, and besides that, my father and my siblings have brown eyes, so what's a big deal?" He said, "He cannot take the features of your family. Look at Dean, he looks every bit like my son, and look at this lump, he doesn't have any of our features. Are you sure he is my grandkid?" I was horrified at his question. I replied, "Are you accusing me of cheating on my husband?" He said, "Then how else the baby doesn't resemble any of us?" I screamed, "Genetics. He looks like me, can't you see?" He got mad at me that I raised my voice at him. He kept the baby back into the bassinet and whispered to Mill, "We're leaving. We don't touch the baby until they do a DNA test to confirm he is my grandchild." He didn't let Mill touch the baby and asked her to come with him. She left with a puppy face. She is another doormat creature. I wanted to smack Phil's head as he left my room. My husband wasn't around. He was downstairs to sign the discharge papers. After a while, he came inside and asked, "What happened?" I saw my folks leaving the hallway. They seemed pretty upset. I screamed, "Your dad thinks my womb is a photocopying machine and this time it malfunctioned and didn't produce your copy." He cracked up at my metaphor and I got mad at him. Now, when I'm writing this, I think it was funny. But at that time, his laugh made me crankier. I was so annoyed that I didn't feel like repeating the incident to him. I told him to ask his parents about this. He is a smart guy. He called his mother and she narrated to him the entire thing. The expression on my husband's face was satisfying. He reacted in the same way I had expected. He flipped out and yelled, "He is my son. We're not running any paternity test to satisfy that grumpy man's ego." Sadly, his mother often has to face the brunt of Phil's behavior. I started crying because it was just too much for me to handle. I had delivered 8 hours ago, I was bleeding. I was in pain due to episiotomy, I was sore nursing the baby, and on top of that, my Phil accused me of cheating. My husband hugged me and said we would not run any paternity test on our child. His support meant everything to me at that point. Dean was staying with his grandparents during my delivery. After I came back home, my husband went to pick him up. Phil was at home. He asked my husband when was the DNA report coming. Yeah, that's how my Phil is. He thinks his statement is a court order and people will have to abide by it. My husband told him that we are not doing any tests and he knows he is the father of our son. I'm sure there would have been more discussion on my character, but my husband said that was it. He brought Dean home. He was happy to meet his younger brother, but he said, "Popsy, his grandfather, was telling that the baby would look like me, then why does the baby has brown eyes and not blue eyes like me?" It made my blood boil, but I said, "Your baby brother looks like Grandma, my dad. You saw his eyes are brown, right?" He nodded and kissed the baby's forehead. There hasn't been any discussion since then, but Phil has not allowed Mill to visit the baby until we run a paternity test. The thing is, we don't give a rat $1 shit about his demand, but it hurts to see Mill suffering. She video calls me to see the baby and sobs that she cannot take him into her arms. I don't know what to do. I mean, I know it's our baby because I have never cheated on me. So, there's no harm in getting the DNA test done and close the matter, but it would be like boosting my Phil's ego, which I really don't want to do. Any suggestion here is highly appreciated. Update 1. Hello all, thanks for the comments. My baby turned 6 months old. He has started looking like me, which I and my husband absolutely adore, but there's a problem with the elder one. I'll come to it eventually. The situation with Phil is still the same. He refused to accept Sean as his grandchild until he saw the DNA report. Mill was also not allowed to meet the baby. However, she visits us during the afternoon when Phil and my husband are at work. No one knew about this secret meeting. It's unusual for people to know that I share a very good relationship with my Mill. She's the reason we are still in touch with Phil. She loves both her grandsons dearly and we don't want to take that away from her. Meanwhile, Dean continued visiting her grandparents. He spent his weekend fishing and golfing with his grandpa. He loved spending time with him. It was a relief for us because it gave us enough time to care for the younger one. However, it was a curse in disguise. Phil is using this opportunity to turn my son against me. 2 weeks ago, Dean told me that I should send Sean back to his parents. I was confused at his request. I said, "We are Sean's parents and it is his house. So where do you want me to send him?" He said he asked his popsy why he was not visiting our home and why we were not having family dinners as we used to have. Phil told him Sean was not his brother and someone else's child, so unless I give him away to his father, he was not going to come to our house. I was flabbergasted at this. How can someone be so evil as to fill poison into a 4-year-old kid? This was not a single incident. Of late, I noticed Dean was behaving very rudely. He had grown resentful of his brother. She throws a lot of tantrums. We were ignoring it until now, taking it to be his meltdown, but now we realize that he's turning into an entitled brat.